Welcome to another episode of Faith in Media, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have our guest with us today, Loretta Andrews of Safe Music. Loretta, welcome to Christians in Media. Welcome to Faith in Media. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really honoured to be asked to be a guest.
I think we are honoured to have you too. I know we've done some of our research and digging into some of your story, which is just really inspirational. You occupy a lot of music space, and I know it's not just limited there. So it'll be lovely just to hear kind of a little bit about Loretta from Loretta's point of view. I always think that's always the better way forward, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've worn many hats all around music and media, really. My most recent hat that I've added is I am now programs manager for music creation at the Institute of Contemporary Music Performance. So that's a recent job that I've added. I started off by doing some master classes here from my music management hat and really loved it. And I really feel passionate about artist development, which is something that I've always been involved in some capacity or other. I guess working backwards, like from working here at the university and with which came out of the music management. My music management came out of working at Premier Christian Radio, where I was doing my unsigned radio show and just met so many incredibly talented young artists who just didn't have a plan. You know, they would play and I'd be like, oh, this is brilliant music. What are you going to do next? And I'm like, oh, I haven't thought about that. And I really enjoyed connecting people, and I'd done so many different things in music. And it was when a friend of mine said, oh, you'd make a really good music manager. And I was like, no, I'm not a manager. I'm a creative. And then in like 1 month, you know, when like God wants you to do something, and like 4 different people said it to me. And I was like, maybe I
Wow.
should look at this. That came from that. But I've done everything from being a singer many years ago. I was a dancer for a while, podcast host myself. I've run live events management. So yeah, a kind of a bit of everything in terms of an overview. But my current hat is as a music manager and as a programs manager.
I mean, that is an impressive repertoire to have under your belt at this time. I just feel like you just have so much more that it sounds that's bubbling as you move forward into your next season. So I'm excited about digging into a little bit of that as well. Now, you started your journey in music at such a young age. Can you tell us a bit more about how that began and what inspired you to pursue music in the first place?
Yeah, so my sister and I've got a twin sister, and we always loved to sing in harmony. Like at 4 years old, my nan said we would on the bus, like sing Wheels in the Bus in 2-part harmony to the
Love that.
passengers, whether they wanted to hear it or not. That's what they got. So I always loved singing. And my dad had actually been a musician in the 70s, like before I was born. He was a bass player and in a band. My claim to fame used to be that they got to number 2 in the charts in 1975 or something like that.
Love that.
So, yeah, music was a big part of our upbringing, and I was always in school plays and things like that. But I really remember around, I think it's about age 14 or 15, you know, when you have the careers interview.
Yes.
And I went to the careers interview, and this lady, the careers officer, said, okay, Loretta, what do you want to do when you leave school, you know, when you grow up? And I remember being like so confident. I don't even think I said I want to. I think I said, oh, I'm going to be a singer. Just said it like that.
Yeah.
And I remember she looked at me, she kind of put her head on the side and put her hand on my knee and said, let's think of a more realistic career, shall we? And whenever I tell that story to my students, like half of them laugh and half of them say, oh my gosh, that's awful.
Right.
This lady, though, she wasn't trying to crush my dreams. She was trying to manage my expectation. And on paper, by looking at my life, I came from a single parent family. We lived on a council estate. Also, at that time, there weren't many people who looked like me, many women of color on TV or in music, apart from in America. So, you know, what she said was kind of, she was trying to manage my expectation. And I remember her saying, 95% of people in music or sports is the same. They don't make it. And I remember leaving there, and guess what my takeaway was, Carla? My takeaway was, well, I'm going to be one of the 5% then.
There we go. Atta girl. That's what I
And
love to hear.
I wasn't deterred at all because I just didn't want to do anything else.
Mm,
And yeah, so I mean, I didn't really know how I was going to do that. And at that time, this amazing institute that I teach at now, they had nothing like that.
wow.
So I was going to go to university, and then at the very last minute, I'd become a Christian. I didn't grow up in a Christian family, and
Wow.
I became a Christian when I was 14. And not long after that, I went to this youth event, and these young people were over from America, and they put on this show, and they were kind of singing and dancing and drama. And I just thought it was amazing. I was just like, that's incredible. They're talking about their faith and they're performing. And I just hadn't occurred to me that you could do both. Like,
Mm,
not growing up in a Christian family, I had all the stereotypes about what a Christian was, and I was really into my music. So when we first went to this church, my mum became a Christian and then had quite a dramatic conversion, and then invited us and said, look, I want you to make your own mind up. So I just thought, oh, this is going to be really boring, and I'm not going to like get on with any, of the young people. And we went to this church, and it was a very modern church. The church band was like a full band, drum kit, guitar. And I was like, oh, I
mm,
thought it was going to be an old lady on an organ kind of thing. And then we went along to the youth group, and the young people were great. I had made so many friends, and they were just like me, dressed in the same fashion, same sort of music. So I still had this passion for music, but I was one of these people that was really passionate about my faith as well. But it was when I saw these young Americans, I was like, oh my gosh, the idea of doing both. But I didn't really know what that would
mm.
look like. And yeah, I was maybe going to go to university. Didn't really want. There wasn't any courses that like excited me. And at the last minute, this was in the day when people still actually read magazines rather than things on the internet. I remember
Yes.
looking at this Christian magazine, and there was this advert that said, "Do you love singing, dancing, and drama? Are you a Christian? Do you want to put all these together?" And I'm there like, yes, 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 that's me. And when I responded to it, it was actually an advert for the School of Creative Ministries, which was a performing
Wow.
arts course that Kensington Temple in London used to run. And I had at that stage, apart from school plays, I'd never done an audition in my life. But me and my
Mm,
sister were like, let's try for this course. So we travelled up to London from Milton Keynes, which is where I went to school. And we did this interview in front of David and Carrie Grant, who were at the time running the school. And I
wow.
was so nervous. I was okay with the singing and the dancing, but I cannot act to save my life.
Bless you.
It was this really embarrassing, like drama sketch thing. Anyway, to my amazement, we got accepted onto this course, which was
Amazing.
incredible. So yeah, all about honing your skills, but all from like an angle of faith. And I was still, fairly new Christian then. And it was a real challenge to then get the money for the course, and
Mm,
we prayed about it. And again, even that was a test to me. Like we had people from our church, to this day I don't know who, but anonymously put money through our door, which paid for our first term. So we like
wow.
took that as a step of faith. And then I got like a part-time job when I moved to London, and it was an incredible year for me. It was the year that I was like, maybe I can do this with my
Yeah.
life as a job. um, so yeah, after that, my very first professional singing job was singing backing vocals for Sting and then people on the Brit Awards. And I just wanted to find that careers teacher and say, look at me now.
Yes, absolutely. That's huge. I love that, Loretta.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So it was an incredible year, really life-changing year. And after that was when I auditioned for what was then the Worldwide Message Tribe, is now people will know as the Message in Manchester.
Okay.
So I was in like the founding group of that many years ago. So that's when I first worked as a dancer and a singer. And at that stage, I was 19. I'd never been on a plane in my life. We didn't have holidays when I grew up. And in that first summer with the Worldwide Message Tribe, I went on 19 planes for the touring that we were doing. So it
Amazing.
was an incredible time of my life, and being able to just speak to young people about my faith in a really dynamic way. And, it was really, really
Mm.
incredible. So yeah, I don't know, should I carry on from there or?
I have so many questions from that already, which is great. I love that you've taken us down this beautiful journey. And I think what really stood out for me was the innocence of like the little step by step of faith.
Mhm.
And I think that's really encouraging for many people now, I think a lot of expectations sometimes is like, well, what do I do with my building blocks? A lot of people's starting point really is quite, I think, resonant with what you had. It wasn't
Yeah.
always a Christian background, not always supported. There wasn't even an industry for it. Now we're living in a really, I would say, privileged industry. Yes, UK gospel music and artistry is on the rise, but in an era where like there was no streaming, where you could just self-publish yourself now or anything to do with that. I mean, listening to the innocence of you, just a simple step ahead. Let me just go to that audition. Let me just try it anyway. And God met you there. That's just so, so encouraging. And I love how also you took us through a bit of a journey of like, it started with the course and then you progressed to your first gig, backing for Sting and M People. In any of those kind of early stages, which, if there was any, was there a most transformative moment for you when you started to bloom into what you felt God was calling you to do in these spaces?
Mm. I think it was really that year on the School of Creative Ministries, because there's something about when you want to do something that's a bit unusual and a bit that,
Mm,
quite frankly, I had no business doing, like looking at my background and my life. You start to sort of play it down, but inside that's what you want. And
mm,
that time of being on that course with those teachers who were so like encouraging, but also being around other young people where out loud people were just saying things like, when I record my single and when I do this, and you look around like, can I say that out loud? You know, when I said that sort of thing all the time at school, they were always trying to, well, maybe you've got good grades, so maybe you should go and do history and all of this. It's
mm,
like, but I don't
mm,
want to do history. It's interesting. I've got a 15-year-old. The conversations we're having now, and he's like, yeah, Mum, I'm going to be a rapper. I'm like, I have no right to tell him not to be.
oh gosh, it's at home at my table.
Yeah. Everything in me wants to say, oh, please go and get a real job. And I'm like, nope, I'm not going to say that because I followed my dreams. But yeah, I think
Mm,
just being around like-minded people who
yeah,
were, and also obviously at that time, which was, gosh, about 20 years ago now, it was a time when also it was new to me that there were all these sort of unwritten rules about what a Christian was and wasn't allowed to do.
right.
So, things have changed so much now. But around that time, Christians were really grappling with, well, can I be in the mainstream? And is that
Yeah.
right? And how do I use my gift? So being around people who were really passionate about Jesus, really passionate about their faith, but also just wanted to be the best singer they could be, the best dancer, and really taking their job in that industry seriously
Mm,
was just really validated for me. That was the moment where I was like, this is what I want to do. And I always, from a very early age, knew I wanted to work in the mainstream as a
mm.
Christian, that I wanted to be an influence in that area and a light in that area. I was very sure about that from the beginning. So I think that year was the most transformative year for me.
I think that's really powerful to hear that. And I think to have clearly there was a very like a direct conviction about I will be good in this space because I feel that's where I'm called to. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes that's really the difference, isn't it? Because it is a scary place. Let's be very honest. There are so many things that we hear that come to light very often in news about just kind of what artists or creatives, like you said, just wanting to live out their dream. That world can suck you in, and then what comes with it is a lot of negativity as well. How
Mm.
did you find balancing what you felt convicted to be an influence in that space and kind of overcome some of the challenges I imagine you were also exposed to kind of in that
Mm.
world?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the challenges came in the areas I didn't think they would. So, to start with, I had a
Interesting.
really great training ground by being with the Message with Mark Penels and Auntie Hawthorne and Zart Porter up in Manchester. Like every gig, rehearsal, anything was started with a Bible study. So that's where I really sort of learned to
Mm,
enjoy the Bible there, and Andy was really hot on that. So that was fantastic. And obviously, I was at that point, I was in a band that was full of Christians, but we were
mm,
working in schools. So we had a real influence in just really seeing the things that young people were sort of grappling with, and just realizing that, and just being really honest with them that being
yeah.
a Christian doesn't mean you get exempt from these things or avoid them, but it does mean you've got this strength to get through it. It's not about
Mm,
avoiding anything, it's
mm,
about
mm,
having the strength to get through something. So I had that. And then, to be honest, I think, lots of people, thought the whole, sex, drugs and rock and roll kind of thing, but they weren't the things that were the challenges for me. So slightly skipping ahead, but after my time in the Message, I was then in another Christian band called Shine, which was a girl band. But then after that, I actually came to being to work, going back to university, retraining in media and working in radio. And my first job was at Premier Radio. And at that point, in a sense, my life looked so together. So I'd, been in these Christian bands. I was married. I was, working. I worked as an assistant producer and very quickly got promoted to being on the breakfast show and all of this. And then I basically got pregnant and was pregnant with my son. And very shortly, like less than a year after my son was born, my marriage broke down. So that was the most difficult time of my life and the most challenging for me. So it was like the challenges around that time of my life. I never had any challenges working in the mainstream that were as difficult as
Interesting.
that, and
Yeah.
that was in the Christian lifestyle and all of those things that. So it was very unexpected. I'd got married thinking that it would be forever, and all of those things like we do. So it really, that time in my life was the biggest challenge to my faith. And the reason I say that is because I don't really think it matters what the challenge is that you have. It can look very different. Those are the times when you find out if your faith is authentic, if your
Yeah.
friendships are authentic, if your life is authentic, if you like. And this I then went through probably the most difficult sort of decade of my life, I think, when I look back, and I really rewrote my faith and what it meant for me in that time. Really saw who showed up for me, like lost some friends that I thought would have been there for me, made some that I really stepped up at that time,
Yeah.
and really had to I challenged myself by putting down everything I was holding to do with my faith that I was just doing because it's what you should do as a Christian. And I made a conscious decision to only pick up the things because it was real, because I'd paid for it, I'd earned that, and it was, I'm not interested in just being part of just some nice club. Like, this stuff's got
Yeah.
to make a difference now.
Yeah.
And I think my life after that probably looked the least Christian out of since I got saved as a 14-year-old than it ever had. Yet for me, I had the most authentic faith and relationship that I'd ever had. It was real, and he was with me in those most difficult times. And weirdly, just as an example, when my son was really small, I'd made a friend in my like sort of prenatal group. Was it antenatal? I never remember what they're
Yeah.
called.
Which order? Yeah.
And she wasn't a Christian, and our sons were born 24 hours apart, and she
Wow.
lived around the corner from me. I was the first out of all my friends to have a baby, so it was completely new, like completely different lifestyles to being in music, and like really hard. And we would meet up most days because we lived really close together, and we got really good friends and went through all the difficult mum stuff together. And it was the time when my life was the most a mess. So my son was probably like, I don't know, maybe one, something like that. And I remember thinking, I'm being such a bad witness to this friend. Like, she's literally seeing my life like fall apart. Anyway, a few months later, she just came up to me and said, "Oh, I've got something to tell you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." She said, "Oh, I just wanted you to know that I've been going to an Alpha course and I've become a Christian." And I was like, "What? Who with? When?" And she went, "No, I've just been listening to little things that you said, and it really inspired me. So I found one through my local church, and I did the whole trip." She didn't tell me at all. She didn't tell anybody. And then she became a Christian. And I was like, "Oh my gosh," she said, "I just want to thank you because it's because of you that I have." And
Wow.
I honestly felt like the worst witness at that time. Like, there was nothing, I wasn't doing anything right, like I thought. But just by, I think, holding on to my faith and just being really honest with her about how difficult it was and where I was getting my strength from, had led her to go and do her own journey. And I was floored by that. I almost felt like God did that as much for me as for her, to go, "Do you know what? That's what you think looks like being a good witness, so that I can still use you even in your brokenness."
I am floored and overwhelmed by just the strength of that testimony so much. And I think anyone that comes across this conversation needs to hear that, because I think you're right. How many times do we feel like am I really the person that's going to be able to shine a light in this moment when I can't really justify what I would equate as the goodness of God? Does this look good right now? No. And just to see, actually, that was a real engagement and demonstration of, this is what real life faith is like. This is what a real God can do in such spaces. And I know you probably did not feel like this at the time, but what a privilege that God was using even what you felt was such a moment where it wasn't at the peak of strength or the peak of what you had envisioned for yourself. And he could still make so much gold in that. It is such a blessing to hear that so much. Wow. I don't want to leave that space, but I do want to just move forward a little bit, because it's just incredible to hear how not just the journey that you went on, but the kind of woman that God was evolving you into through all of those stages is just so inspirational. And that you transitioned into music management and artist management. And you alluded to this in your introduction, which was great. What inspired you to take that's a whole different challenge? Performing, doing, like, literally is the dream. The way you described your life was literally what I had in mind for myself too. And it's lovely to meet someone like, I've done it, top hat and everything, but transitioning into kind of like almost the development of people is what music management is. How did you find yourself there, and what drew you to that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do this with so I coach artists as well as the artists that I actually manage, and also obviously with the teaching with students. I do all of this stuff around really being connected with your why, which in Christian speak for us is, why we're here and what we're called to really, but we all have a why. And when I think back when I was like 14 and became a Christian and saw those young people, there was something that sort of leapt within me. And then when I think about the work I did with The Message, where I was working with young people through that band, and then when I was working at Premier Radio with the Unsigned show in particular, but also with the Drive Time show, what I didn't realise, all of it really was mentoring. And although it all looked really different, what I realised is the thing that I really love is like helping people to achieve their dreams. And I think it's because mine seemed so impossible when I was younger. And I just believe you've got to have this big dream like here, and then, aim here and you might get there. If you only aim there, you're only going to get there.
True.
So, the whole thing is that whenever I've looked for what's the next move for me to do, I've really looked whether it ticks that box. And again, I kind of fought against the music management thing. So it was actually Isaac, Guvna B.
Yeah.
He was working, doing some work with Premier Gospel with their sort of digital content. And I was going on about some music again, and I didn't realise he was overhearing me. And we knew each other as friends, and he came over, he's like, "You're really passionate about music, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Well done.
He was going through a stage where he didn't particularly want a manager. He hadn't always had good experiences with that, and he'd done very well to self-manage. But for his next album, he was thinking about maybe working with someone. So he said, "Oh, I really like your ideas." And we didn't call it management; we called it partnering or something. We came up with some weird word because we were both afraid of manager. I was like, "No, I'm not a manager." He was like, "No, I don't want a manager."
Yeah, funny. Oh, goodness.
It actually was on his Hands Are Made for Working album, which we didn't know it was going to be that album at the time. We started working on a different album, and then I'm sure you're familiar with the story, but he very suddenly lost his dad, and then like, "I cannot do this album. I now need to write about this."
Wow.
So together we were like, how do I, from going from this rapper who does this sort of like, jumping up and down party music, talk about grief and mental health, fatherhood and loss. So we sort of navigated that space, and we really worked together about coming up with a campaign that we felt would really be therapeutic for him, but also just really address some really unsaid things in our community around mental health, particularly for young Black men. That was the album. That was a real sort of his first crossover album, where we got new space on radio and different kind of looks. And we still started working on the second album before we said, "Oh, I guess this is management. Shall we make it official?" So it wasn't kind of decided on thing. I just fell into it. And the same with Joshua Luke Smith. I interviewed him on my radio show, and I just was so taken by his vision and how he had this whole thing about doing something bigger than art. And I was very much drawn to these artists who were incredible artists, but at the same time wanted to impact more than their art. So we again, I initially just helped him with a tour, and then I helped him with something else, and then that became very natural. And the same with Bianca Rose. So it was one of those things that I initially started to fight, and it was only when I felt like I could frame it as mentorship, because I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I've got no idea what music manager is. But interestingly, and isn't this so God as well? Like when I looked back, all the different things I'd done in my life, which was a very wiggly line, I felt like I'd learned so many different aspects of the music industry, from being a signed artist, being a session singer, working in radio, on the journalism side, running the live event that Unsigned turned into, that I realised with what is a music manager today, especially for an independent artist, you have to know a little bit of all of those
About
things.
everything. Yeah.
But I was being
Yeah.
trained for the role without realizing it. And I was surprisingly fulfilled by it. I was ready to not be the person out on stage anymore, and just get an incredible amount of fulfillment by helping people to plan their way towards their dreams.
That is just incredible. And I think there does become a bit more of a shift, and different people, different things. But to hear kind of your involvement into it just sounds, like you said, I think already it felt like such a God thing, because you didn't realize how he was preparing you from stages that you never saw was going to culminate to this new role now. And also, I think what you're talking about now, in terms of there is a huge skepticism and a bit of a wariness about, artists who are independent. They focus on their music. The business side and the management side is a daunting space, and more
Yes.
often than not, many horror stories accompanied by people being exploited. So to have someone who, like yourself, who has just been an absolute sincere, I'm here to build people, and how you've won people over with the integrity of your steps and your history and your own kind of career progression, has been clearly a light for so many people. I want to know where you find the balance. The names that you've mentioned: Guvna B, Isaac, Luke Smith, Joshua Luke Smith, and Bianca Rose. These are really, really strong artists that are so visible in our music industry now. How do you still find the balance managing them? You've just started a new role within, and I imagine making amazing waves where you are now as your professorship job, and just still holding on to your creativity. How are you managing all of these hats?
Well, I don't know really. I mean, I used to like be obsessed, especially when my son was young, with listening to reading articles and listening to things that would talk about work-life balance, because I thought,
Yes.
well, maybe they're going to give me the secret to how to do it. And quite honestly, I don't think there is one. I think, and things change, when depending on the age of your children, and depending on,
Yeah.
the stage of careers, and somehow what I do know though is that whole thing about what's the scripture about enlarging your tent pegs.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I remember somebody telling me that before, 'cause every time I've taken on an artist, I always said I was only going to manage one. Then I did two. I said I'm only going to manage two, and then I did three. And at one point, I actually had five when I was working with Jake
Wow.
Isaac as well, and Madison Ryan Ward. So there was one year, and that really was too much. But for a
And
long,
also, they're not even in England. I'd love
yes,
to know how you managed to do that.
yeah. I mean, it was meant to be like for 2 months, and it ended up being a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, for 3.5 years, I managed four artists. And I remember when I took on that decision, and I asked my other artists, because I quite differently to a lot of other managers, my company is very much like a family. It's called Safe Music. I called it that because I wanted it to be a safe place for
Yeah.
artists to grow and nurture their talent. So when I made the decision to take on a fourth artist, I asked the others, how did they feel about that? And I said, do you think I can do this? Do you think I've got capacity?
Yeah.
And all of them said, I think you do. I really think you do. Like, as you are learning and stretching yourself, your tent is just getting wider. And yeah, it was difficult sometimes, but I really did feel with each, it was all very gradual, and it was just more of a stretching. I was like, oh, I do have the capacity with that. And my son was a bit older and a little bit more independent then as well, so that helped. And yet, even with this new role, things have changed in the last year of my life. I'm now back down to three artists, and actually Bianca's on a little bit of a break. So in practice, it's more like two. So
Mm.
again, the opportunity here came very organically. It was just a masterclass that it was teaching a few hours, and then this role came up, and they're so supportive of
That's
my
amazing.
management and give me space for that. So it's all a bit of push and pull. There's just
Yeah.
no formula. I
Yeah.
think it's about moving towards things that you feel passionate about. I somehow find the energy if I'm excited about it. I think that's true of most things. And I definitely get it wrong sometimes.
It
But
means you're only human.
yeah, if I knew the sort of formula and secret, I would definitely write a book, but I don't.
It's so interesting that you say that. And I think there's just so much value to how you've even described what that process has been like to you. I was at an event a long time ago, a networking event, and a young lady that I was talking to said, I've given up on this idea about the work-life balance. What I'm really pursuing is harmony, because, and I thought this has changed my perspective, and I'll share it here as well. And she said, and kind of to the effect of, not exactly these words, but in essence, that when we think about balance, what we're having to do is actually let something go for a while. Whereas harmony is like you give everything its correct season. And I think that really kind of tied into the way you describe there is a push and a pull and a moment where these things happen. And sometimes they do a full circle back. But it means that it's not about balance, it's the harmony. They can flow together. And
I
that's what
love
we should be
that.
good with doing. Right? So
Yeah.
I love what you said there. And I think even the way that you've described it is a lot like her amazing description of it.
Yeah,
And that's
I'm
really,
definitely
really
going to
inspiring.
steal that.
I have, yes. Please share it. I think everyone could feel, I think, a lot less pressure on ourselves,
Yeah.
especially when we have so much, I think, inside of us as people of God, like destiny and greatness. We're built like that. Whether we, God is, we're made in the image of God. Therefore, things to go out, explore, expand, grow is such a big part of our makeup. And it
Yeah.
looks different for everybody, but it does feel like, well, I'm living in this very real world with very real responsibilities. How can I be true to those callings? But also I need to be in the present. I'm not, delusional, losing touch with things. And when she spoke about harmony, I was like, God, that makes so much sense to me. And hopefully that will help. I'd like to talk just a little bit about, just your work with diversity and inclusion, which is super encouraging. And I know it comes hot and cold in the press as a concept. And I think even in the church, they're not quite sure where to tread with it, but you've done so much incredible positive work with your PRS Foundation's Power Up scheme. Can you tell us what that process has been like? Not just bringing your expertise as a manager and even your approach has been so holistic and pastoral with the safe space of artist growth, but also you're really advocating for some important issues as well. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, again, I think what it comes down to, Carla, is that I've just always had a big mouth. And like when I
I
think
can
back,
deal with that.
yeah,
Yes.
when I think back to that mouthy teenager in that,
Yeah.
careers interview down to, being on a stage, in Manchester with kids and all the different things that I've done, I've really enjoyed communicating the things that I'm passionate about that I feel really matter. And, in 2020, when the world remembered that racism still existed, which, we as people of colour, are very aware of every day, I just really felt, I just want to do something more than just
Yeah.
rant about it on Facebook or
Mm,
put up a black square on Instagram that doesn't really mean anything. And
mm,
luckily around that time, there were a few of us who felt the same. And obviously, we, as Black people, have seen movements over history. There was like Rock Against Racism in the 80s and different things that seemed like a real moment. And then they sort of came and passed and it was just a phase. And I think this time there was so many of us who just desperately felt on one level that there was something different, that we really had the world's attention in a different way. But also we've got to make this count. We've got to make
yeah.
the needle move a little bit. And one of those groups was the PRS Foundation, and in particular, Joe Franklin and Ben, who now works for AIM, and they worked together at the time.
Wonderful.
And they were like, let's not just put a black square up. What can we do to put our money where our mouths are to really change the industry that we're in, which happens to be music? So they came up with the Power Up program, which is where each year they select 20 music artists and 20 music industry executives. And you basically get some training, you get some funding. It's all about personal development. And the whole idea is to just break through that kind of glass ceiling where we've
Yeah.
seen white counterparts, just overtake us or not have the opportunities or having to work twice as hard. But at the same time, created a network. And what I love about it is they didn't just say, oh, let's do this for 2020. And loads of people did things for 2020. But they've committed for 10 years to run
Wow.
this program.
Amazing.
So I was fortunate enough I applied, and that very first year I was one of those who were accepted. And it was just, again, an incredible year. I think many of us felt like in that year that plasters were ripped off old wounds, that, we weren't really allowed to talk about. We pretended we're fine and didn't hurt too much, and we were allowed to say about it. And I don't know about you, but I had friends that I'd known for years who contacted me and said, do you feel some of this like racism stuff? Like white
It
friends.
was an interesting time. I will say
Some
that it
very
was an
interesting
interesting time.
conversations. And I was like, yeah, all the time. And they're like, really? I mean, you never talk about it. And I was like, well, how do I, like, sometimes if we bring it up, it feels like you've got a chip on your shoulder, or you're making everything about
Mm.
race. And so one of the things that was really incredible were the conversations I had with white friends. And one friend who, again, a different friend that I met when I was pregnant, she, in just such a beautiful way, contacted me privately on Facebook and said, hey, our kids are the same age. I really want to do better by my kids. Like, are there any books that you can recommend on this subject? She said, I really am not asking you to do my learning for me. I'm going to do it myself, but I just wondered if you know of any. And I replied to her and I said, firstly, can I just thank you for how you've
Yeah,
asked me? Like, she checked in on me, how I was, if I had the
that's
capacity to answer her
amazing.
question. I said, funny enough, I don't. And you've probably done this already, but I've done a quick Google and there aren't any.
Mm.
And I said, you know what, you should maybe write one, because she's also in education. She's got a master's in education. I said, oh no, I don't think it's my space to write this. You should write one. And I was just like, oh no, you should something. And that was the conversation. Anyway, then I said to her, do you mind if I just post it? I said, actually, I honestly think that's a good idea. I'm going to black out about the book. But do you mind if I post our conversation on my Facebook? Because you just asked me in such a great way. And people keep
Yeah,
going, oh, we can't have these conversations.
yeah.
So I did, and I had all these comments underneath talking about our conversation. And one of them was a friend who DM'd me who works in publishing, and I obviously didn't hide it very well, because she said, "Were you and your friend talking about a book?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, we were actually." And she said, "That's amazing. There aren't any books now, because a book talking to children about how you talk to children about race." And she said, "Well, would you and your friend like to write it?" And I was like, hang on a minute, I didn't want to write
Amazing.
a book. And she's like, honestly, I think it'd be so great, like the two of you together as a black and a white friend, both mums. So I was like, okay. So I spoke to my friend Ruth about it, and she was like, okay. And she said, well, let's just do the proposal. So we did the proposal, sent it to my friend in publishing, who sent it to her editor. And weirdly, they actually, in the end, were like, we don't think it's for us. We actually want to do a book that's for children, whereas the book we had in mind would be for parents or
Right,
caregivers of
right.
children. But she said, look, now you've done this proposal, it's such a good idea. Why don't you just send it to a few other publishers? So we're like, okay. So not expecting much, we did. And the second one we sent it to said, we want you to do this book. We want to publish this book.
Amazing.
So it's interesting to go back to your question. Sorry, it's a very long answer, but the things that I've done in this space, again, have just been about just being passionate about something and
Yeah,
speaking about it. And, my first thing was somebody should write this book. And then it's again like God going, well, why don't you write this book? So we ended up writing this book, which was published 2 years ago, called Talking
congratulations.
About Race. Yeah. And it was published by SPCK, so a Christian publishers. Which was again a really beautiful experience, because my friend is not a Christian, and we had some really interesting conversations around that. And the book is not to like slap anyone and say, you're
Mm.
doing it wrong. It's a gentle arm around the shoulders, and let's have this conversation.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
have this conversation with our kids. And kids like take this stuff in their stride. They're so much better than us. So weirdly, writing the book has been so many opportunities for speaking about some of these spaces, and about EDI matters have come up through writing that book. And I never intended to write a book. I also never want to write a book again. It was so stressful. But yeah, I managed to be interviewed about the book in lots of different spaces. I've spoken on panels as well from that
Mm.
perspective, and a lot of adults, because we kind of did it in a way that you could speak to kids. It also
Yeah,
broke down some things for adults that were like, I've always wanted someone to speak to me and tell me what
mm.
anti-racist meant, but I was too scared to ask. And
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is just a really easy read, just answering some questions that adults and kids might have.
Amazing. I feel like we're going to talk forever, and we know that we can't do that. But this has just been incredible to hear your story. And also, like, I think what's been a really amazing thread from all that you've said is wherever you have found yourself, it's happened organically and it's really been tapped into like very organic and authentic passions of yours. And I think and I mentioned we've got quite a lot of young mentees and young people that find our podcast and find listening to the narratives and stories of some really great, prominent people in their careers, is to hear how do they do that? How do they get there? And to hear that your story is like, firstly, there's a conviction in your heart and it's really motivated by like, I'm really passionate about some really important things, passionate about people, passionate about making a difference. And you'll find your breadcrumbs and follow the route. And it's really been kind of the outcome of so much of what you've shared today, which I'm so grateful for. My final question to you, just to close, is what's next for you? And what are you hoping, maybe in like a really wide way, to leave behind with all of the kind of work and the projects that you've done?
Yeah, that's a great question, and funny enough, it's something I think about a lot because I've always, like, from that first night that I put my hand up to become a Christian, I remember thinking I want to make a difference, and I didn't
Mm,
mind if it was to one person, or loads of people. I just wanted something to have made a difference,
yeah,
and so I think about my kind of legacy a lot, and in all the opportunities that come my way, I always think, is this actually making a difference or is this just noise? Is this, can I contribute something here? So I kind of lead with that a lot. And like I said, my most recent move is to start here at the Institute of Contemporary Music Performance. And it's something, again, that I just didn't plan, but it so aligns with my values
mm,
of being able to influence in a positive way. And I just love the students. So many of them just remind me of myself, and just these big, crazy dreams and
yeah,
talent, and just wanting to equip them so that they know how to look after their art and know the
yeah,
business side of the music. And I've always felt very protective to young people and to artists, and to be equipped with knowledge. So at the moment, I'm really looking forward to this new role. It's so new that I don't even really know the full weight of it yet, but I'm going to be looking after the songwriting degree, the first, second, and third
wow,
years, and also the songwriting and artist development degree, as well as looking after the department. And it's just a really wonderful place to work. They really care about EDI. I've literally seen them make change. Lots of places say, oh, it takes so long to make changes.
yeah,
They've made changes, significant changes in 1 year.
incredible,
And
wow,
it's a brilliant place to work in. So, yeah, what's next for me is to just pour into the place where I am. I've always wanted to, whoever's around me, is just to influence them. Hopefully, anyone who comes into contact with me is left feeling a bit better about life and themselves. That's kind of how I lead each day, really. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting stuck into this role. Really looking forward to working with my artists. Joshua Luke Smith's got an album coming out next month, which we've been
amazing.
working on for a year. Guvna B is writing a new project at the moment. So very much looking forward to developing their careers further. And yeah, just creating safe spaces for artists to grow, really.
And it's just so encouraging to have people like you in the position that you are, kind of as a shepherd, helping people through kind of what they need to be doing in terms of these fields. And it's wonderful to know that there's people like you out there doing the work that you're doing. Loretta, this has been such a privilege. Thank you so much for being with us today, and wishing you every blessing and all of the best for all of your endeavors. And I just imagine God is going to do so many incredible things from this moment forward, and that every single one of your desires of your heart is kind of achieved. Thank you so much for being with us at Faith in Media today.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Faith in Media with Carla Adebekin. Make sure you catch our episodes and hit subscribe. Please share and leave us a comment. Christians in Media is a UK charity that supports, encourages, and inspires Christians from across the ever-changing media landscape. Find out more at www.christiansinmedia.co.uk and connect with us via our socials.